Bill Lee, president of the Lee Consulting Group, recently wrote, "Traditional marketing may be dead, but the new possibilities hold much greater promise." For more on traditional versus non-traditional marketing, Tony Kunderman, editor of you're going to have to help me there.
Editor of
Ad Review, that would help me there, thank you. And Simona Levitt, strategist and journalist, all join us in the studio now. Tony, my apologies on that. Thanks very much. It didn't make sense to me. Right, so let's talk about traditional versus the new forms of marketing. Do many of us have to adjust to the reality that traditional marketing is in fact dead?
Well, dead is far too emphatic a word. It's declining, and there's a ton of human tendency to, when something's declining, to take it to its extreme and say that's the end of it. I don't think it's the end of it for an awful long time, but the nature of marketing is changing quite radically. There's the old marketing, there's the new marketing, and both of them will coexist for quite a long time, and there'll be a sort of subtle migration. And one of the secrets of success would be to monitor that migration and adjust accordingly.
One of the elements that came up in this article is that CEOs are getting increasingly frustrated with their marketing managers, in that they're asking for budgets, they're deploying those budgets, and they're not seeing the return on capital.
I think I always find the Facebook example very, very interesting, because in theory it's the perfect business tool. You can target dentists that are 27 years old and live in Sandton, and you should be able to serve the perfect advert. And their conversion rates still remain very, very low, historically very, very low. There are a lot of tools that should be making these conversions actually happen, and they're not happening as expected. So I think, I agree with Tony in terms of just saying that traditional marketing is dead is not necessarily correct. I think you've got to be very careful about how you deploy budgets. I mean, I think people do. There used to be fat in our budgets. I mean, we could have had a Christmas bonus last year if we'd. But I mean, that's the reality. Is people are counting their pennies now, and I think there's a hell of a lot more focus on return on investment.
When we look at return on investment, are we going to get it from the new media platforms?
Well, I think the new media platform has a lot to offer in terms of getting bang for buck. Basically, what we're seeing is, first of all, it offers huge amplification. For example, corporates are no longer dealing with just the consumer. They're actually dealing with the entire social network of that consumer. The other factor is that provided they engage in a true conversation, they can actually leverage that feedback to feed through into their entire supply chain process, and actually feed it through into their customer relations management tools. So I think there's enormous scope for companies to actually gain a lot more from social media than they would have been able to gain from a traditional media platform.
How are we seeing things skewing out there, Tony? If you look again at the traditional versus new media platforms, are we seeing companies now clearly starting to deploy more capital into investigating the new media space, which in effect is going to land up more cost effective? Perhaps I can use that analogy.
Yes, there is a clear trend. I mean, globally, one of the advantages of being in South Africa is that you can see into the future, because what's happening in Western Europe and America now, and Japan, and in fact all over the world virtually, is what we can expect to see here. So there's a clear trend. It's much more strongly evident and defined in the more advanced markets, but it's happening here too, and probably about 2 or 3 years behind them. But one of the sad things in a way is that we're going much more slowly than we should be, and it's partly put down to the government being rather sort of Luddite in its approach to the internet. That they've been slow in getting cheap, fast broadband, and until you have that, you won't have the usage, which in turn leads to the commercial opportunities. So in Africa as a whole, where we've been in the past technologically ahead of the continent, there are 5 or 6 nations that have got a higher level of internet penetration than we have in this country. And these are not nations that are richer than South Africa. I think some of them, maybe Nigeria is one of them. It's a rich economy, and yet it's on a per capita basis, it's much poorer than South Africa. I think all of them are poorer than South Africa. We should be ahead, and we're not.
Our business models are under threat. You are traditional print, we are traditional television, and certainly in reading this article, I was really fast tracking that process and saying we are going the right route in terms of trying to be innovative, embracing new media platforms into our traditional. How quickly are you doing it as Van Week?
Yeah, I mean, well, I panicked and I started brushing off the CV a little bit. I think that we're looking at it in terms of when our advertisers come to us, very often it used to be, well, we'll take one page in your magazine or a double page spread or whatever. Now they're looking for far more engagement. Instead of targeting 20 or 30,000 people, maybe they're only interested in 5 or 6 very, very niche CEOs, for instance, or C-suite executives. So we've seen quite a lot of requests of that kind of nature from advertisers rather than just traditional, or maybe they want to blend it in with a little bit of a social campaign, some print campaign, and some kind of event linked to it. And I think you've got to try and really deliver bang for buck there.
Examples of companies who are doing it right.
Well, the first that comes to mind is Mr. Price. What they did is that they actually identified customer influencers, bloggers who they afforded a preview to their recent retail online platform launch. And that worked very, very, very well. It was the word of mouth, and it actually generated such a lot of interest in the blogosphere and on Twitter. So they really managed to create a viral campaign out of that launch. The other aspect that we've seen a very successful campaign is the iAmbassadors campaign that was launched by Cape Town Tourism. And there again, they identified influencers within the travel environment, and they actually mobilized the Cape Townians through a hashtag on Twitter. And that also generated a lot of interest.
Tony, I was recently in New York and I was watching television in the hotel room. And what I noticed was an absence of beautiful ads, the ads that we see where you've got the man skydiving off the mountain in the sunset. What I saw exactly what Simone is talking about now, and that was really testimonials, people coming through, and one in particular for itchy skin care. I just remember it, the man saying, this is what I do. It wasn't even brand champions. It was the man in the street saying, I had eczema, I used this product and it sorted me out. That was it. It was just testimonial after testimonial. That trend in South Africa, are we lagging?
Well, we are rather representative of the old model still, because that's the whole nature of creativity in advertising is different now. And it's that kind of thing, which is not the kind of idea that wins awards at festivals like the Cannes Lions. And it may be time to start thinking, moving away from the whole idea of awards, or certainly of that kind. These are very often more kind of effectiveness award material. But the old idea, of a TV commercial where you just showed it and people absorbed it and they never responded, that's gone forever. A totally different marketplace now.
To add on to what Tony was saying is that marketers need to embrace the new type of consumer. We're no longer dealing with the passive consumer of the past. Consumers now are active, they want to be engaged in a dialogue, they're much more vocal, and they're more likely to actually follow what their peers are saying than what a marketer's message is directing.
Yes, examples of massive PR cock-ups that are allowed.
No, you can do it. The other day I said balls to the wall and there was nobody coming back at me, so I think we can go with that as well.
I mean, we've had BP, which is quoted around the world for the appalling crassness with which they dealt, with which they handled a major crisis for lots of people. I mean, the chief executive who said on air, well, I want a laugh too, and on that very day, 17 of them had been killed on this. I mean, it's unbelievably bad. Look at Lonmin right now. There's a massive case story building for how not to do it.
Exactly, and a couple of these companies are going to go down, as you say, Tony, in history as how not to handle campaigns, which comes back to reputation and how important your brand is. It's not just about the advertising, but dealing with a crisis.
Yeah, I mean, one of the good examples of that is, I think it's Nestle with the Greenpeace adverts. They had a campaign which was essentially to deal with the rainforests, and sorry, Greenpeace made a spoof advert of one of theirs to protecting the rainforest, and it became a viral fight between the social media administrators for Nestle and the Greenpeace, you know, the activists that was out there. And I think these things can go wrong very, very quickly. So I think you do have to balance out, and you got to have the right people controlling your message. I mean, you know, I always laugh when you have a look at all of these social media strategists, and they're 22 years old and they run a blog. I mean, you got to be very careful about what that person is saying about your brand, because you actually need to, you got to understand the aspect of a brand. I mean, you protect brand integrity. You know, one of the examples is the liquor brands. You know, they're very, very specific about the colours and the logos and that kind of thing. There's a lot of lazy branding that happens where people say, well, it doesn't matter whether I'm slightly off red or I'm slightly off black, or my colours are slightly wrong. There are other people that really own the integrity of those brands, and I think that's an important part.
People perhaps underestimate the power of a YouTube, a social media platform, but I always go back to the simple example of Justin Bieber, one of the biggest pop stars of our generation. I see all the smiles coming over. That's the reality. The Toys in the stores, if you squeeze them, they play his songs. He was launched via a video on YouTube. That's the reality here.
Well, I think it's important to understand the proliferation of the internet. So marketers really have to embrace it in order to remain relevant. If you look at this South African example, at the end of 2011, about 8.5 million users were using internet in South Africa. There were about 3.8 million Facebook users. And that growth rate is huge. The internet usage has grown 25% year on year. So it's really up to marketers to embrace it as a very powerful tool.
Tony, we spoke earlier about the television medium and how that is changing to the testimonial type advertisement. Is print following a similar trend where, again, we're not just looking at the pretty pictures and the great payoff line, but it's more about an endorsement from a brand champion? Are we seeing that trend happening as well?
Well, print is the one of the traditional media which is probably weakest in terms of the new environment.
You better put your CV out there very quickly.
and is battling to find, because all of the others, if you think about it, there are commonalities. I mean, radio is already an interactive medium. I mean, talkback radio, they're used to responding immediately to things to news and things that happen on the air. Television is going to become like a huge laptop on your wall, with everything in your life on television as well as all your other activities. But print doesn't have a natural affinity with the new medium. It's got to be developed and built. Now, I'm not saying it can't be done, but a lot of work needs to be put into it.